And just like every other time, we are back. My name is Charbel, Milan. Today we got
Kathleen Imbach.
and this is a time shared. So Kathleen, just to get you up to speed real quick, this is a time shared, the one and only podcast here in Atlanta that's trying to bring light to people like you, people who are out here chasing their own path, trying to innovate, and really make something different. So before we get going, I'm gonna just give you a moment to get everyone up to speed on who you are, what you do, and everything they should know about you before we get going.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, my name is Kathleen. I am a fifth year biology undergraduate student at Georgia Institute of Technology. I currently am working in a research lab on campus doing like analysis of single cell RNA-seq data, which obviously I'll get into more later. But yeah, I also have a Spanish minor. I graduate in December, so almost done. Let's see, what else? I don't know. I feel like that's pretty much just.
Sweet. So there's a lot of things in there that you were gonna get to because, I feel like the average person has no idea what you're talking about, but we will.
Yeah.
So what made you want to come to Georgia Tech first? What was it about tech specifically?
So I have wanted to be a doctor since I was a kid. And so I knew that like wherever I went, I either wanted to study biology or neuroscience. And I mean, when I was at the end of high school, I was kind of just like looking all over. And obviously I knew about Georgia Tech because my older sister went here as well. Though she graduated with more of kind of like arts degree because she graduated literature, media, and communications. But so I'd been to campus before and stayed with her and like liked it. And ultimately, I was kind of just choosing between Georgia State and Georgia Tech because I got like a really nice scholarship from Georgia State, which was cool. But just like knowing about the opportunities that like are presented at Tech, especially in terms of like research and just networking and things like that, ultimately I ended up deciding, to go to Tech. And I got Zell Miller, which is nice because
Wow.
I'm in state. So that was a big part of it as well. But yeah.
So you definitely made the right choice.
I hope so, yeah.
I'll tell you that from personal experience. This is great campus, great
Yeah.
environment. So when you first got to Tech, did you know exactly what you were trying to do, or did you kind of just get in and see what was available and what kind of started to gravitate towards you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It actually is kind of funny because, I mean, so one of the things about being a biology student at Georgia Tech is that you have to do some form of undergraduate research at your time here, which I knew I wanted to come in and be a doctor, and I accepted the fact that at some point I was going to have to like work in somebody's lab doing something, but I really did not anticipate like being really passionate about it and enjoying it to the extent that I did. So I kind of was just like, okay, yeah, I want to be a doctor, whatever. And I got in touch with a professor who runs a lab that is joint with the BME, which is Biomedical Engineering Department at Georgia Tech and Emory. So his lab is physically at Emory, but he's also like technically a Georgia Tech faculty member. And I worked in his lab for a year doing, basically he works in like an immunological lab where he develops nanotherapeutics for various immunological disorders. And the one that I was working on in particular was like developing this new nanoimmunotherapy that would serve to inhibit brain cancer cells in children with brain cancer, like neuroblastoma. So that was really interesting. I really liked it. And it was a lot of like wet lab stuff. So, like you're in a hood, like mixing chemicals, treating cells, all of those things. And then I kind of just like decided that I wanted to branch out and get more of like an idea of other fields or other, I guess, subfields within the field of biology. And it's funny because when I was first like trying to find a lab to join, I actually reached out to my current PI, and he kind of responded to me and was like, you have a great resume, but I think that you just need a little bit more experience. Like, we don't really have space for you right now. So after I did my year in Dr. Drayden's lab, I ended up reaching back out to him as one of the people I like was just kind of like, hey, would love to, chat and like perhaps become a part of your team if that's a possibility. And so what's different is he does all bioinformatics stuff. So it's like you get biological data, but on my end, I'm just purely computationally analyzing this data, So like as before I was like, like actually kind of pipetting and doing all of the wet lab type of things. And then I totally shifted to now doing computational things, there was a huge learning curve at first because I am not at all familiar with any kind of, like coding or anything. So yeah, I like learned R, and mostly I use R now, which is nice. It's pretty user friendly. So it wasn't that hard
R is
to figure
interesting.
out. Yeah, R is cool.
Ah.
You can do so much with it. But yeah, so I ended up joining his lab and just really falling in love with the work and just like the things that you can do with all this data. And it's so interesting because I feel like in the future there will be a huge demand for bioinformatics students and just like, professors of bioinformatics, because a lot of times what the case is if you have this separation of kind of spheres where you have people on the bio side who are able to do the lab stuff, are able to come up with experiments, are able to implement them, all of that. And then you have people on the computer science side that are able to analyze data. But it's pretty rare that you have an intersection of the two, which is ultimately really helpful because it's really great to be able to like, running an algorithm and getting all this output and being like, okay, I reasonably understand what this means on a biological sense, So yeah, I just ended up being like, wow, I never expected to like research as much as I did, but I loved it and was like, I think I need to kind of reform my whole plan of like my future. And so I like declared a research option certificate at Georgia Tech, which basically is just like, all bio students have to take research, but it's kind of like you take additional like literature classes about like how to properly write a proposal, how to write a thesis, things like that. And it just looks a little bit better when you graduate. And I also just kind of when I was deciding what I wanted to do in the future, I just was like, I think I would like to do an MD PhD rather than just an MD, because I really do think that I would be sad if I didn't have like the research side of things, And so, yeah, so kind of just like ended up demanding my attention a lot more than I thought. And it really did just kind of like, was just a weird, like harmony of situations that I was lucky enough to find myself in. But yeah, I really like it. So.
Wow. So the first thing I kind of want to address, because I'm confused on this, and I've spoken to a lot of other people, and I think they're also confused on this. Is it true that cancer is in all of us, but our body like fights it off, and then like when it gets out of control, that's cancer? Or
yeah. So like the actual threshold for cancer is kind of, it depends, right? So, but essentially the way that cancer arises is an accumulation of mutations in your cells, which are happening quite often. Like when your cells are replicating, sometimes when their DNA is being replicated, they're mess ups, and that can cause, problems further down the line, whether it be like being able to avoid cell death or kind of undergoing uncontrolled proliferation or things like that. But luckily our body has a lot of checkpoints to be able to kind of anticipate and account for that. So, like during the cell cycle, you have different checkpoints where your cells are actually making sure that the DNA was properly replicated before it like goes on to the next step. But the problem is once you get a gene knocked down in one of those like kind of checkpoint areas, then you're really screwed, because now you have nothing checking for it and you start to accumulate mutations a lot more quickly. And that's really when it starts to get like full blown kind of like tumor malignancy.
Oh, so like a security guard falling asleep. And
exactly.
then it was able to get in.
Yeah, not even falling asleep. It's like he gets shot in the head.
Oh,
and like
oh wow, he's gone.
He's gone. Yeah,
and the
at
door's
least in
open.
that cell, he's gone.
Wow. Okay.
And like, yeah, sometimes like your body, like if like malignant cells occur, sometimes your immune system is able to account for that and kind of like keep it under control and obliterate them completely. But if you have a particularly aggressive case or maybe a suppressed immune system for whatever reason, then it's very possible that your body is really not able to kind of manage and things get out of control very quickly.
So for children specifically, is it a genetic thing? Like how could a child, like the part that I get stuck on is it's kind of like luck of the draw.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And the thing is like, I don't think I or anybody else has a clear answer about how it specifically happens, especially in children. Like there's just so much that we don't know yet. But definitely, people are working on it, trying to figure it out and stuff. But yeah, it's hard to know what exactly it is that is able to like manipulate your body's defenses to serve itself, which is essentially what cancer cells are doing, you know. But yeah, so it's hard to say, and I think it depends. It also depends on the type of cancer, of course. But the good thing is a lot of cancers in children have really better outcomes than cancers in adults, because when you're a kid, like, you still have all of these cells that are like undetermined yet. You know, you have like a lot of like proliferating cells. Your immune system's not fully developed, which actually adds a bit of a boost. So a lot of times, especially in like the cancers that are most common in children, which is like typically leukemia, lymphoma type of things, kids are able to really, their bodies are just amazing, and they're able to just kind of bounce back after being treated, you know, which is awesome. So like, I think, I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but I think for like ALL, like survival rate is like something in the high 90s, like
Wow.
90%. Yeah. For
That's
kids.
amazing.
So that's great. Yeah. But again, it really just does depend.
That's
So,
amazing.
Yeah.
So when you first got in there and, you know, you applied for the first place that you're actually a part of now, but, you know, they
Yeah.
said you wanted more experience. What was it like when you were first getting involved? And I guess you could say, did you realize that there was as much data involved as the research side? Or what kind of surprised you when you started to get more hands-on in the lab?
One thing that was really surprising, like, you mean in the lab I'm in now, yeah, with like the
Just in general, when you
Yeah.
started actually being hands-on.
Yeah. I think that I was just surprised about like, I mean, yeah, it's a shock kind of, you know, when you join a lab, because it's like everybody knows who's in a lab, like PhD students, master's students kind of just know how it goes, like knows that lab. It's like, it's a really trial of like your ability to like adapt and overcome, honestly, I feel like, because no matter what lab you're in, no matter what you're doing, there's going to be situations in which you plan for something to happen and it doesn't work out the way you think it is going to work out. And so you have to like be very apt to like thinking on your feet and changing things last minute and working around things and like being able to just like logically work your way through things to kind of troubleshoot. And that's something I didn't realize, just because, you know, like normal labs that you have in class, you know, like for example, when you're in a chemistry lab, they're like, okay, today we're doing this experiment. You do this, this, and this is supposed to happen. And like, they've already tested it, you know, you usually have all the tools for it to like pretty much work out according to plan. But when you're like actually implementing an experiment that you designed, and like maybe with reagents that you've never used before or like something like that, like things kind of go awry very easily. And it, like, when you first join a lab, you're like, holy fuck, like, what do I do? Like, this is so stressful, blah, blah, blah. But over time, you just kind of like get used to being like, okay, didn't expect this, but it's happening, so let's try to figure it out, you know, type of thing. And I feel very thankful to have had that experience, especially just because I feel like it applies to so much else in life, especially right now with COVID and everything being so uncertain, you know, like you plan for things to work out, like, or you plan for your future to like go do something, and then all of a sudden you're in the middle of a global pandemic, everything has been halted, life is completely different, and you just kind of have to be like, well, this is how it is now, so this is, I'm gonna work with what I have, type of thing, you know.
It's crazy. It's crazy how things become relevant when it's too late, like this pandemic.
I know.
Like, didn't they close, or not close down, but didn't they shut down or dissolve the pandemic like team, like in the government, like a year before all this happened?
Probably. I did not hear about that, but I wouldn't be surprised, honestly. But
Wow.
yeah. Things, I mean, pandemics honestly are just, that's just a part of humanity. Like, there's always going to be pandemics. You know, there was one 100 years ago in the 1920s. And there will probably be another one pretty soon. Like, you know, like that's just the way it works. When you're an organism living among other organisms that are trying to use your body as like a host, like that just happens sometimes. But yeah, it is sad though, just the kind of global devastation that this has brought and how much it's affected people's lives on such a large scale. Yeah, it is crazy.
So when you're in the lab, is the objective almost to try it? We'll get to like the data side, but as far as like being hands-on, working with a sample, are you trying to irritate the sample and see like reactions? Like, if you like, did you have like cancer in front of you and you guys are trying to, you test something and it gets worse, and you're like, okay, that got worse, and like, how
Okay.
exactly does it go?
So, I mean, there's tons of things that you can do. In my personal experience of what I was doing, it was kind of like we were working alongside a collaborator who was a pediatric oncologist who specialized in, like brain tumors, essentially. And so she had basically this hypothesis that you can take advantage of a certain transcription factors in cells that are often implicated in this specific type of cancer, and kind of inhibit it so that the cancer cells are not able to proliferate, and then they're inhibited. And then so that can make the patients easier to treat. So essentially what I was doing was getting like a really long polymer backbone, just like, carbohydrate chain, and basically conjugating 3 different molecules to it. One molecule was for entry into the cell. So it was just like a molecule that was able to bind to a receptor on the cancer cells and get in. Another molecule was for entry into the nucleus, because you need specific signals on molecules to be able to just go into the nucleus. They're highly regulated because, the nucleus, there's DNA in there. There's important things, So one was that. And then the last one was a protein that was specially designed to inhibit the function of this transcription factor binding to the DNA. So what I did was you have all these bottles of all these things, and I did something called a click chemistry reaction, which is basically when you have molecules with an azide and with an alkyne, and you're able to conjugate them together. It's like, using, I think it's usually like copper catalyzed, but yeah, so I had no idea what I was doing. Also, I would like to say that. Like, I went into this lab, my PI was like, all right, I have a cool project for you to do while you're here. This is what you're going to do. And I was like, wow, this sounds like a lot of responsibility, but here we go, I guess. So he was a chemistry, he had a bachelor's in chemistry from UGA. So he was really knowledgeable of the chemistry side of things. And he was like, oh, it's easy. It's just like a recipe, like blah, 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 blah. I was like, okay. So essentially I was the one who like synthesized this molecule. And then I purified it over a period of months just to make sure that it's, what it says it is. And the good thing about this is that, so when we have these certain things conjugated to the polymer, we order them such that they have fluorescent markers on them. So you can try to figure out the concentration of it. So then I did a lot of experiments of just like, kind of fluorescence checks to see how concentrated the substance was, because we wanted to figure out like what molar concentration would be most applicable to cells. And then like all in the meanwhile, I have these cancer cells that are in cultures that like every week you have to like feed and change and to make sure that they stay alive. So they're just like waiting for me to come back and like do stuff with them.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. But then once I was ready, I actually like did experiments where I put so first what you do is you get your cancer cells and then you like dye them, or like you do a cell viability assay to make sure that you like get rid of the ones that are dead and keep only the ones that are alive. And then you basically fluorescently dye their nuclei. So like there's just a lot of like, it's usually like Host that you use, which basically just kind of like when you look at them under a fluorescence microscope, you can see like the cell outline and then the nucleus. And then I basically put my, kind of nanotherapeutic that I developed into these cells and let them incubate, and then washed it off, and then essentially like mounted them onto slides, and then went and got trained on this fluorescence microscope and looked at it, and yeah, just it was cool. It worked. Like it got into the cells and like did what it was supposed to do, which was cool.
Okay, so this is a part that I want to really understand. So you got the first one, and the first one kind of allows entry into the cell.
Right.
And then you have, what is it? You want to come on this side? And then you have, oh yeah, that's fine. So then you have the one that actually gets into the nucleus. So are you trying to trick the cell to allow you in to see how you can manipulate it, or are you trying to trick the cell to allow you in to see how it works?
So kind of both. So you're tricking the cell, like you're giving it all the right sequences to get into the cell, because essentially the kicker here, the actual therapeutic side of it, is the little molecule that we conjugated that is the like going to serve as a protein-protein interaction interruption between the transcription factor and the like DNA, like where it's binding to the DNA. So the whole point is like getting access into the cell, getting access into the nucleus, so that finally we have, like, you're in the space where that transcription factor exists. And then you have that little protein that is like able to block it from binding to the cell's DNA to prevent the cells to keep like growing and kind of like generating new cells, if that makes sense. So like, I mean, that's just, you kind of have to do a couple more steps to let a cell let you in and get into its nucleus. But then after that, it was really just that one molecule that we hypothesized would significantly interrupt the interactions. Though I will say, I didn't get to like a point in the research project where I was able to really kind of go in and definitively test the inhibition itself. I just was mostly focused on actually generating it, finding out the concentration, putting it onto cancer cells, and then kind of like fluorescently verifying that it actually localized where we wanted it to and was successfully gaining entry into cells. But yeah.
So the fluorescent allowed you to track it pretty much?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
It's like, yeah.
Just lights it
There's
up.
like specific microscopes where so like each fluorescent marker emits waves at a specific wavelength and absorbs them at a specific wavelength. And so you can like basically harmonize the microscope to catch certain colors. And we know which colors we're working with because we ordered them, right? So yeah, it just like works like that. And then you can just like go in and visualize it, which is really cool.
God, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. So I know that you mentioned that you guys were culturing, like keeping the cancer alive, and if you didn't, it would die. And that is really interesting to me because it makes me wonder, well, not makes me wonder, it makes me want to ask you, is the hardest part about cancer or a tumor like developing and getting started, or is it staying alive? Because how exactly, like, does the cancer not feed on itself, or does it feed on the host, which is kind of itself?
So the way that the cancer typically derives its nutrients is it's able to manipulate the systems already in place in your body that are kind of like implicated in getting nutrients to your cells, which is usually like blood vessels, right? So like your cells take up oxygen, get rid of carbon dioxide, and you have blood vessels all over your body that are allowing this exchange of gas to take place. So one really interesting thing about cancer is that typically they're able to undergo what's called angiogenesis, where they're able to take advantage of your body's like vascular system and literally like grow new vessels around the tumor itself so that they have direct entry into like nutrient exchange processes, and they're able to kind of like hoard those nutrients away from healthy cells so as to better feed themselves. But the thing is, when you're culturing cancer cells, you don't have a body. There's no host. It's just cells sitting in a little plastic container in some media. So to keep them alive, you have to like change out the media to make sure they still have plenty of nutrients, make sure that they're not proliferating too fast. So then they like all have enough like sufficient space, to be able to like take in these nutrients, things like that.
Okay, so I know a lot of times when people unfortunately get diagnosed with any type of cancer, they always refer to it in stages. They're like, oh, you have stage 2, stage 4, or like, what exactly are the stages? And I guess for starters, what are the stages?
I mean, okay, so that's something I'm not super familiar with just because I feel like that's a little bit more of a clinical side of cancer. So like that's, hopefully once I get my MD, hopefully I'll be able to answer that question. But I think it just means like how far your disease has progressed. So I think that like depending on the disease, like depending on the type of cancer you have and depending on like the kind of known hallmarks of the way in which that disease typically worsens in a body throughout time, I think they have these like, I don't want to say arbitrary, but kind of like quantifiable check marks where they're like, okay, this has happened. So now like you're kind of fucked type of thing. And usually a lot of times when it comes to solid tumors, because like, okay, in the case with me, I had leukemia when I was a kid, which is a cancer of the lymphatic system. So that is like different from solid tumors, and that it's like in your blood, in your lymph. And so it's circulating around your body the whole time. But in the case with solid tumors, typically a really big kind of like turning point for the worse in your disease progression is when your cancer is able to metastasize. And that means it's able to like, you have tumor. So you have a tumor, say you have breast cancer, for example. So you have a tumor in your breast where your cancer cells are growing and proliferating. Once they metastasize, that means that they're able to travel to different parts of your body and colonize a new area. So a lot of times that's a really big kind of like detrimental step in disease, because once it metastasizes, it's a lot harder to treat, because it's really hard to account for like where the cells are. Like, for example, like if you have a solid tumor, typically the like first kind of like step of therapy is you go in and you try to excise it. So you try to cut it out, literally. And then you usually undergo chemotherapy as well to account for anything that might have been left behind. But if you have cancer cells metastasizing throughout your body, it's really hard to know where they're localized, how many there are, if they're continuing to migrate, things like that. So typically that's kind of when shit hits the fan, basically, in cancer patients. So I think that a lot of times, and I could be totally wrong, but if I had to guess, I would say that a lot of times the staging is dependent on that as well. And just like probably like, you know, how big the tumor is, things like that. But yeah.
Okay, so as far as treatment goes, is because the thing that I find pretty ironic, well, not ironic, that's a bad word. The thing that I find pretty surprising is that, you know, like my uncle, he died from leukemia at 4 years
I'm
old.
sorry.
Yeah, so he died at 4 years old. I never met the guy, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That was my grandma's first son.
Okay.
She went on to have 5 kids. They're all healthy, thank God.
Yeah.
But I've also been around other people who unfortunately have been diagnosed with types of cancers. And it's been years. You're talking like 20 years and the same treatments are happening. Is it because they found something that worked, or is it because they don't really know what's going on? So they do a general treatment to just try to stop all cell growth, which is, from my understanding, chemotherapy.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it just depends. Like, you know, it's difficult to find therapies that work for everybody. And so chemotherapy is good in that it's pretty broad in terms of the way in which it works. So, you know, it is able to target rapidly dividing cells and kill them. Like, that's just the way that it works, which is why you lose your hair as well, because, you know, those are rapidly dividing cells, and things like that. But I mean, you do have the issue where people stop responding to chemotherapy. And in that point, it's like, what do we do? And I mean, now with all of the technology and research people have been doing, there are other like therapeutic methodologies. For example, checkpoint inhibition therapy, which basically takes advantage of the way in which cancer cells kind of like manipulate your own immune system to like be able to like stay under the radar and not be killed by cells.
Kind of like AIDS?
Yeah, kind of different. Yeah.
Same idea?
Yeah, it's similar. It's like, it's basically just like, so when you have in your body, if you have, say you have a cold or something, like the actual symptoms of your cold, sniffles, all of that is technically manifestations of your immune system exhibiting an inflammatory response to whatever the virus is, because usually it's in your respiratory system. But, you know, you have to have checkpoints in your body in place to make sure that your immune system is not attacking every part of your body. You know, those cells are only in your respiratory system. So it doesn't need to like go in and attack your kidney or something crazy like that. You know what I mean? So basically the way that your body accounts for that is it has this thing called checkpoint inhibition, which are basically on cells. You have CTLA-4 and PD-1, which are basically molecules that have been implicated in like kind of like mediating, you know, immune kind of like intolerance, basically. But like for good reasons, you know, because you don't want your whole body to attack every cell in your body. But cancer is able to manipulate the fact that you have that and ends up having like receptors and, you know, markers on its surface that take advantage of those checkpoints on other cells. So like cancer will be like, oh, sneaky, like this immune cell is going to try to attack me, but I'm going to use this PD-L1 ligand that I have to block its PD-1. So now it thinks that I'm just a normal part of the immune body that shouldn't be attacking. So basically the way that checkpoint inhibition therapy works is it takes advantage of those on cancer cells and like goes in and is able to like kind of like destroy that kind of like
camouflage.
Yeah, basically. So then your body is like, oh, never mind, and like we'll go in and like attack it.
Oh, see, that's crazy. The body is just so equipped to take care of everything, but of course you got all this shit adapting
I
to
know.
go under
But the
radar.
problem with that as well is that some people, you know, like end up also like exhibiting a tolerance to that as well. So it really just depends. And So yeah, I mean, chemotherapy is definitely like in surgery, depending on whether or not it's a solid tumor, are typically the first like frontline therapies used and also the cheapest. But researchers are trying to investigate other things. Just, and that's kind of where my study comes in that I'm working in now, which is like more of the data side. So aside from, the previous thing I was doing with neuroblastoma therapeutic, what I'm working on now is really like trying to see what it is in your biology, both in your cancer cells and in your immune system itself, that kind of mitigate whether or not a patient responds or does not respond to chemotherapy the first time around. Because, like I said earlier, the good thing about leukemia in children is that the prognosis is typically very good. Like typically most kids survive and live, great full lives, and they're all right once they like undergo chemotherapy. Um, but for that small percentage of patients who are not able to respond well to chemotherapy, their prognosis goes way down. Like their likelihood of survival decreases significantly if they're not able to respond to chemotherapy that first time around. So it's really important for us as researchers and clinicians to kind of better understand why it is that that happens in specific patients and whether or not it can be accounted for before giving chemotherapy. Like ideally, it would be amazing if there was some kind of test you could give a child with chemo or with leukemia to be like, oh, based on what we were able to see in their immune system, they're probably not going to respond to this. So we need to try to use another therapy alongside it, or we need to use another therapy instead. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to do now, basically.
So what's radiation? Are those like interchangeable, or is that a different?
No, that's different.
Oh, okay.
Oh, which radiation, yeah. Radiation is also a huge thing that's used, which is basically like, literally submitting your cells to like radioactive waves.
Is it like targeted, or is that something that they do to the whole body?
I think it's targeted usually,
Okay.
but it does have like really bad side effects on other parts of your body as well, just because it's so toxic. And so yeah, so people are that's usually like a last resort type of thing. Like they won't use radiation if they don't think they have to, because it really does mess up a lot of your systems in your body for the rest of your life, honestly. Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow. So now you're working in a different part. You're working more with data.
Yes.
So when it comes to the data side of things, what are some things that surprised you? Because you went from working hands-on and now you're working more with data. And I know that a lot of the times you think something's a certain way, but then once you look at the data, like I know it was like stock trading, Forex trading,
Yeah.
like when you look at data, you're like, oh, wait a minute, there's something completely different going on than what
Yeah.
we thought we were seeing.
I think what is most surprising about like kind of the data side of biology and just bioinformatics is just how rich it is in information. There's so much going on, especially in the case of single cell RNA-seq. We're literally looking at RNA transcripts present in thousands of single cells. There's so much information there, and it's really hard to figure out like what's relevant, what is actually biologically significant, and what's just kind of background. And so one thing that can be frustrating, I suppose, is that you have lots of researchers all over the world who are using these techniques, trying to figure out the best way to go about analyzing this type of data. But there's a lot of like conflicting, like kind of like methodologies used, and just like different ideas about the best way that you should account for like dropouts or, background noise or batch effects. And it's hard to know like what the best approach is, because there's just so much, and there's like, do we all really know like what is like the best thing to do? No. Like everybody's just trying to figure it out, you know what I mean? And especially because this technology is so new. It really has only been around for like, I don't know, like several years. So yeah, so you have like, I mean, luckily I'm not on the math side of like literally writing the algorithms of like all the statistical kind of implications that go into the types of thing that I employ with my data. But there are people doing that, and it's just crazy to like it can be scary, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this because it's a lot of people say that it is the best approach, and it does a really good job of being able to handle these effects to better illustrate what's truly going on inside of these cells. But do I really know if it's working or if it's kind of conflating false information and finding significance where there truly is none? Not really. Like, you know? So I think that that is like, that was the most surprising thing to me is it's just like interesting when you're because I feel like when you're growing up and you hear about research and you hear about people who are like doing these studies, you're just like, wow, these people are so smart. And don't get me wrong, they are smart. They're geniuses. Like people who write these algorithms, these codes that we use are like they're brilliant. But it's just like funny because you realize like once you kind of get to the stage where you're actually like involved in it, working with it, talking to people about it, that like everybody's kind of just trying to figure it out. You know what I mean? Like no one is truly an expert in any kind of academic setting because we're all like uncovering new information as we go and we're all learning from each other. And it's just so interesting to kind of be a part of that and just see that happen in real time. See people be like, "Oh, actually this was not a good way to do this and this is why. So now we're going to try to do this," you know? So yeah, I feel like that was interesting. And I think that's definitely true from like going from a wet lab too because like, you know, wet lab protocols, it's like, okay, incubate cells, take cells out, aspirate off media. You know, you have like a like almost like a little recipe of like things you're trying to do in an experiment. Whereas now I'm like, shit, should I log normalize this? Or, you know, like you have like so many options and it's kind of like you have to figure out the best kind of way to proceed with the data that you have and it just depends. So yeah, uncertainty is kind of a big thing.
So it's just kind of trial and error.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times, yeah.
Do you think we'll ever get ahead of it? Is it the type of thing that's just kind of like always evolving, always mutating?
I don't know. Well, will we ever really understand the way in which the body works and all of the nuances implicated in you know the proliferation and kind of like progression of disease? It's hard to say. I would like to think so, that one day, like, we will get to or, like, maybe not perfectly, but get really close. And honestly, I think that data science will be the thing that gets us there because when you think about stuff like this, like, especially in terms of, like, genome studies and things like that, I mean, basically what all those things are is it's getting data from, like, so many different people with totally different backgrounds, totally different environments, totally different upbringings, and basically just looking for trends. And like, yes, I mean, it's really difficult to reduce an individual to trends that you are like discovering from huge bulk studies. But I think ultimately, like, once we'll get to a point, hopefully, where we have just like so much data compiled on different people that we'll be able to kind of like make these associations with a pretty good degree of certainty, you know? So yeah, but it's really hard to say like whether we'll ever be able to figure it out and like you know the human body is just so complicated. There's just like so much going on. There's so much that depends on other things and like small seemingly insignificant kind of triggers can have like detrimental effects. It really just depends. And it depends on the person you are too and the way that your DNA is structured and where you've been exposed, like where you've lived your life, the type of life you've lived, how much you exercise, what do you eat, what are you thinking
Oh,
about?
that's so crazy. That's
It's
exactly what I
crazy.
was gonna ask next.
Yeah.
Is cancer genetic or is it lifestyle choices
It depends.
that are
It depends.
taught through families
Almost
through
always, almost always it's a combination.
Oh, it is.
I'm
Okay.
a strong believer of the kind of like gene bioenvironment thing for everything, really. I think that there is like there's always going to be a genetic side of things and there's always going to be an environmental aspect and I don't think that there's ever really going to be able we're ever going to be able to compartmentalize them truly to be able to be like, "Oh, this is fully genetic, this is fully environmental." Obviously, we have diseases where things come pretty close where it's like, okay, since you're you know, like studies of families have shown that this is a very heritable disease. So, you know, that has a lot of like genetic kind of implications in terms of causes and just the way that it kind of continues throughout a lineage. But yeah, I really do think that it depends totally on like just everything else in your life as well. Like who you are, what you're doing, you know, where you're living, how you're feeling. And one thing that I think is really interesting as well is so kind of also to do with RNA sequencing studies. There's been a lot of studies recently that are kind of like investigating the biome in your gut So actually like kind of like sequencing to see all the bacteria that are present. And they're finding a huge correlation of like just kind of your microbiome in your stomach and how diverse it is and what types of bacteria you have with like neurological diseases. They do it in studies of mothers with who are pregnant with children to see like how like they are gonna like basically affect their child. And one
Like
thing,
if you're predisposed to have a certain type of disease?
well, kind of, it's just like it depends what's in your mom's microbiome when you have a
Oh,
baby,
okay.
you know? Because one thing that's really interesting about C-section babies is a lot of times they have like health issues further down the line, and people are starting to hypothesize that the reason what that is because you get so much of your mother's like bacteria when you actually exit the birth canal because you are like exiting through all of her fluids, you know, you kind of like get all of her bacteria, her good bacteria that are growing in her body. And so there's been a lot of studies that show that C-section babies will kind of like have problems because they're not getting all of that good bacteria first thing in their life. So they have like, yeah, so it's really interesting. So I think now like a lot of times what doctors will do are like literally like rub the placenta on them kind of and like, you know, like add a little bit of fluid to their forehead, or I don't know how they do it, honestly. Maybe it's not the placenta. I could be totally wrong. Something.
Sounds right.
something.
It sounds about right.
Something. But like just stuff like that is so interesting. And like they also are finding now that a lot of like neurotransmitters in your brain are also present in your gut. So like, you know, you are what you eat might be a little bit more more true than we think it is, you know, in terms of like if you're eating good, like you're probably feeling good because you're giving your body nutrients that it likes. And if you're eating bad, you're like not really fostering a good environment in your stomach, and therefore that's connected to your brain, and it's just kind of gets things all out of whack. So yeah, I definitely think that as we progress in time, we kind of chip away at the secrets of the way in which the body works and how everything is connected. But will we ever get to a place in which we have unveiled the whole thing? Probably not. Probably not before we all kill each other, you know?
Yeah. It's probably more likely to happen first.
Yeah.
Wow. So I guess not in like a morbid way, but
Okay.
is cancer reversible, or is it just kind of like if you have it, it's more about how can we treat it to mitigate it to extend your life expectancy? Like, is there like actual studies to show people that have had aggressive cancers and eliminated it?
I think, yeah. I mean, I think as time goes on, that becomes more prevalent. It's definitely still not the norm. Like, obviously, the people who tend to survive and achieve remission and like lead healthy lives thereafter are usually ones who have the disease caught very early. You know, it's not like widespread in their body. But I think with the way that technology is going in terms of the type of therapeutics that are available, like we are seeing more instances of a lot better prognosis than doctors maybe would have given somebody 10 years ago. And a good example of that is Jimmy Carter. Like Jimmy Carter had a really, really aggressive form of what kind of cancer did he have? I don't know. But he was treated at Winship, which is at Emory. It's a cancer center. And I think he maybe, I don't know if he received checkpoint inhibition therapy or if it was CAR T cell therapy. But he did some type of kind of like novel regimen at the time and ended up like enjoying a full recovery, which is just
Wow.
kind of, yeah.
And it was novel at the time. So it was just kind of like, let's try it.
Yeah, like all of this stuff. I mean, like obviously it had been approved by the FDA and all of that by that point, but yeah, I mean, these therapies that we're talking about, like CAR T and checkpoint inhibition therapies, that's like past 15 years type of development, you know? Like when did the researchers who discovered CAR T or the checkpoint inhibition, they won the Nobel Prize in like, I want to say early 2000s. So like this is recent stuff going on here. Yeah. So we still have a lot more to figure out and to employ and see how it works. But yeah, things I think are hopefully going in the right direction to like be able to save people's lives. But as far as cancer as a kind of, you know, development, yeah, that's always gonna happen. Like you're always gonna have people who have cells who mutate and just kind of like lose all kind of checkpoint, you know, and just kind of get out of control. Like, I think that's just always going to happen. And they're actually seeing like rises in cancer rates, which I think, and I mean, don't quote me on this, but well, I guess you kind of are, but which I think is like totally to do with not only pollution and how shitty we treat our environment and how many chemicals that we all ingest and are surrounded by all the time, but I think our way of life as well. Like when you think about like the way in which people lead their lives in this capitalist society, how much stress they're under, how you always feel like you have to be doing something, how there's like almost this like demonization of rest, you know, like people are always like, oh, you should be being productive. Like, are you in your bag? Like, you know, just stuff like that. Like, it's stressful and it weighs on people. And you have tons of wealth inequality and, you know, like people trying to make it out of poverty. And like, that takes a toll on your physical being as well, you know? Like I said, like I definitely think that your mental state is really, really heavily connected with your physical existence. And I think that levels of stress definitely have a direct bearing on increased levels of different diseases in today's day and age. And so, yeah, I think as a society, we all kind of need to be like, hey, like, what should we be prioritizing? Because I don't think it's the top 1%. And I don't think it's making $1 billion. I think it's being nice to each other, treating everybody with respect and compassion, treating yourself with respect and compassion, being kind to your environment, loving your environment, you know, treating it with respect as well. Like, I think that as a society, we just kind of need to reevaluate what's going on so we can better take care of ourselves and each other and the planet. And ultimately that serves all of us because I think that we're all like connected in some way. So
That's amazing.
yeah.
Wow. So you're clearly very knowledgeable, but it's also because you have a really deep track record. You're not just talking. You've done this kind of stuff, both
Yeah.
sides, physical, wet labs, research. Where do we plan to see you go next? What are you trying to, because I know you're graduating in December.
I am graduating in
So what are
December.
some of the next steps that come along with this type of pathway?
So yeah, like I said before, when I came to college, I really wanted to get an MD. You know, I wanted to be a doctor since I was 7, since I went into remission myself. I feel like my experience with just healthcare industry and like, you know, being cured of leukemia made me fall in love with the medical field in general. And since that, I've always wanted to become a part of that. And just kind of pay it forward, you know, like be able to use the privilege that I have of survival, quite literally, to give that to other people if I'm able to. But after doing research, I really was like, wow, this is incredible and I really enjoy it. And I definitely don't want to stop doing it, you know? So then I was like, okay, I kind of want to get an MD PhD, which is like an 8-year type of thing.
After the 4 years?
After I graduate here, you know?
So then 8 more.
Mm-hmm. And then you do residency and all that good stuff.
Yeah, but that's the big bucks.
That's a big bucks.
Dedicating
yeah.
8 years. That's
True, yeah.
That's a small class of people.
It's the good thing about that though is so MD is notoriously expensive. You know, when you go to medical school, it's like expensive as hell. Like people go into like, you know, it's just a lot of money that you have to pay to do that. But when you do an MD PhD, it's paid for.
Wow.
Yeah.
So wait a minute. Whoa. How? What happens there? That's kind of crazy. It's a higher level certification?
I guess, yeah. It's just like if you go to a school and you get your MD and your PhD at the same time, you don't have to pay tuition to do your MD. Which
That's
is
awesome.
Yeah, awesome.
Oh my God.
Amazing. Yeah. So it's 8 years, but ideally you graduate with little to no debt. You know. But yeah, so I mean, I had planned to graduate in December because quite late into my college career, I declared a Spanish minor, which was kind of the result of me actually shadowing my own oncologist. I shadowed him, and it's a sad story. I don't know if I want to get into all of that right now. We can go back to it, but if you want. But then so I knew I was graduating in December, and initially I planned on, you know, this summer taking my MCAT, applying to schools, and hopefully starting in a program next fall. And then COVID hit and everything just went up in the air. I couldn't even find a place to take my test because they kept being kind of postponed and canceled due to the, just like fears of the pandemic and kind of like anxieties of transmission among people and sitting in a testing room taking the MCAT. Um, so I kind of just reevaluated and I was like, am I really ready after being in school for, let's see, what, kindergarten, 12th grade, that's 13 years, plus 5 years, that's 18 years, back to back? Like, am I ready to go commit another 8, like next year? And I was like, no, I'm not. I don't think I am. I think I need a break. So I think it was a blessing in disguise of me being like, hey, I actually don't have to rush into this and do this right now. And I can do something else in the meantime that I'm still passionate about that will still make me feel good and continue on the like kind of, path of my life that I see myself going down. And so because I have this Spanish minor and because I want to do things with health, I was like, I think I'm gonna apply to the Peace Corps, which is something I've been thinking about for a long time. And I was kind of like, well, I guess I can't really go to the Peace Corps if I'm gonna do MD, PhD. Like maybe I'll just do Doctors Without Borders once I get my MD. But then I was like, why? I'm never gonna be this free again in my life. Once I finish undergrad, like I'm have nothing tying me anywhere. So I was like, screw it. I'm gonna apply to the Peace Corps and apply to like a health sector based volunteer program and hopefully I'll be able to do that. Still waiting to hear back and things are a bit up in the air because of the pandemic and all of that. But yeah, so that's my plan. And then after Peace Corps, I'll just reevaluate kind of thing. I feel like I've kind of fallen out of the habit of making long-term plans after COVID, just because it's like, I feel like it's just better to be present. It makes you feel better. There's less anxiety and everything is so uncertain anyway. So, what's the point of making these plans just for kind of like extenuating circumstances to then come in, get rid of them, and then you freak out because you're like, oh my God, I was planning to do this and now I have no plan. Like, just have no plan, I think.
Why not live free?
Live free. Yeah. So I think that that's what I'm going to do. I will go to the Peace Corps. If I still want to get an MD, PhD when I get out, I'll start working to do that. If I want to do something else, I'll do something else. Like.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Damn. Not to be a downer, but what was that story? What was the reason you got the Spanish minor?
Yes. So, I mean, I spoke Spanish and I took Spanish in high school as well. And so I like wanted to continue learning Spanish and I've always wanted to be fluent in Spanish. But once I started coming to tech and I had to do my language requirement, I switched back to German just because I like lived in Germany and figured it would be easy and stuff. But so I went to shadow my oncologist, who was the one who treated me for leukemia. He still works at Emory. And he actually works in like solid tumors now. So I went and spent a couple days with him. And so the first day I went with him, I was just doing kind of like his inpatient or like his clinical rounds. And then we like the next day like went and visited the patients who were like actually inpatient. So like those are the ones who are like receiving treatment type of thing. And I remember like one of the second patients we visited. So the way they do it is like usually there's kind of like, a group of doctors who are like kind of like they usually have like a main doctor and then like residents as well working with them. So they kind of like all go around and like go check in with the families, just talk about like, hey, how's your son, how's your daughter doing? Like any bad symptoms today, like anything we need to be aware of, like, just checking in type of thing. So I think it was like the second kind of like people we went to go see. And there was another woman, another doctor who like kind of like turned to my oncologist. His name is Dr. Olson and was like, I don't know if we should let her come in here with us. Like, I don't know if this is a good idea. And he like turned to me and was like, yeah, so it's up to you. But basically the patient in this room is in really bad shape. Like he's gonna die like today, maybe tomorrow. So if you want to wait out here, that's fine, but you don't have to. Like, if you want to come in, that's fine too. Whatever. I like trust you to make the judgment for yourself. And I was like, I mean, I'm here shadowing you to try to figure out if this is a job that I could potentially see myself doing in the future, and this is part of the job. So I'm just gonna let's do it, basically. And so we went in, and we had to go in with a translator because the family was Hispanic. I don't remember exactly where they were from. I want to say Honduran, but I could be wrong. Anyways, it doesn't matter. They spoke Spanish and he did not speak Spanish. And so they went in and, there was just this little boy who's 4, just gasping for air and just like seemed so like labored and raspy. And his mom was like, like, is he in any pain? He seems like he's in pain. Like the noises he's making, this doesn't seem right. And the doctor was like, no, no, he's not in any pain at all. Like this is just a neurological side effect of like his brain kind of like losing oxygen and like, kind of like the gasping for air, but he actually is like, okay, like this, it's just like the way it is, kind of, that's just what happens when you die. Um, and so he's saying these things, but of course there's actually like a stranger who's another like translator who's like relating his words back in Spanish to the family, relating their questions back to him. And the whole thing, it just made me so sad. I mean, obviously, because, this poor family is going through probably one of the hardest parts that they're ever going to face in their life of like watching their young son die, which is just terrible. But also at the same time, you have this like element of impersonality and kind of just distance between them and their physician because there is that language barrier. And, it's like they have this like random woman who's like having to relay their messages back and forth. And it's like, is she really conveying the things that I want her to say in a way that I hope,
Oh,
like, I mean,
yeah.
the whole thing just seemed like so much more impersonal than like a doctor directly speaking to a patient's family. And I was like, wow, this sucks. And it like, then like after that, we went into like multiple other patients' rooms who were also primarily Spanish speaking. And so like we had to again use a translator. And it just like, I was just like, so many people speak Spanish in this country. If it takes me learning the Spanish language and becoming fluent and being able to use it in a medical setting to be able to like kind of reach a broader group of people and be able to relate to them and help them and kind of just establish a more cohesive, intimate connection with them, then that's what I'm gonna do. Like I'm like, that is learning a language is not that hard. I love Spanish. I think it's so interesting. I think it's beautiful. There's so much culture. There's so many places in the world where people speak Spanish. And if that is gonna be the like factor that makes me being able to like directly help like X amount of more people in this country, then like, okay, fine. Like I'll do that.
Just to hit the depth,
Yeah.
like to be able to communicate with
Yeah.
more depth because
Yeah.
it's a
Just to be able
deep
to communicate
situation.
and like offer my services to people, to Spanish community. And I think that like, it's interesting. I took this medical Spanish class last semester as part of my minor, which we talk about like, just a lot of vocabulary and stuff, but it's also talk about the rates of different diseases and illnesses among the like Latin American community in the United States and the Hispanic community and also in different like countries in Central and South America. Um, and a lot of times, there are like Hispanic communities within the United States who don't trust American doctors and feel always like condescended or like not listened to when they go to the doctor. And so a lot of times you have these people who have these illnesses and are undiagnosed and untreated simply because there's that element of like, distrust and kind of discomfort and uncertainty and fear. And then, there's a whole other thing about like just, undocumented people not being able to kind of safely seek out those kinds of resources, which is awful.
Tragic.
But yeah, so I definitely think that it's something that needs to be addressed more kind of robustly in our society because it doesn't like if you don't speak English and you live in America, I don't care. I think that you still should have best access to healthcare ever because you're a human being and you deserve to be safe and happy and healthy. So yeah.
Oh, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Well, hey, believe it or not, we are at an hour. So before we
Perfect.
go, first thing I want to do is just really thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
I know I grew in my understanding today. I know a lot of people will. And before we go, if you just want to take a quick moment, shout out like your Instagram pages or just any pages where people can follow you,
Okay.
stay up to date with you on your research and just, you in general.
Okay, yeah. Let's see. I feel like on Instagram I don't really post my research, but you can follow me anyways. My handle is Kathleen_Jane. I think I'm private, so you'll have to request it. Sorry. And then I don't know. I have a LinkedIn, Kathleen Imbach, if you really want to keep up with me like that. Yeah, that's pretty much all.
Oh, well, thank you so much for
Yeah,
everything you've been
thank
doing
you.
for humanity as a whole.
Yeah,
And,
trying my best, you know.
and thank you so much for, sitting down today and talking with us. But
Yeah,
just like every other time, my name is Charbel Milan. Today we got,
Kathleen Imbach.
and this has been a time shared. Thank you so much.
Thank you.